Azimio Moja One Kenya coalition leader Raila Odinga is reportedly working on a plan to mobilize Kenyans and pile pressure on the Ruto administration to fulfill its campaign promises as the high cost of living continues unabated. In fact, Odinga has hinted at a bombshell, saying he will, at the right time, speak to Kenyans and his supporters who are still reeling from the pain of his 5th presidential election loss on his next course of action. Ishmael, what we have a government that is just 2 months and a week, I think, into office, but the pressure is on, and you have the Azimio leader Raila Odinga taking up the mantle. He's been told several times by the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, you go to the opposition and put us on check. So he is actually doing that. So
I think there are two ways in which we can talk about this particular story. One, Raila is getting back into his real metal. He's going back into what he's made of, and this really feels good. We keep asking why actually he did not sustain his position during the presidential campaigns. Probably now things would be different. But having said that, you know, we are not even in the 100, are we done 100 days?
Not yet.
Just about. So, so really, I think, and again, I'm sure the former Prime Minister is trying to just prepare his brigades. He wants to inform people that he's not irrelevant and he cannot be really, if you read history properly. So, but the problem would be, his supporters would be asking how he comes out very, you know, very powerful after such elections, when he was supposed to be more powerful before actually the elections. So he probably could go to State House. I think people got disappointed that the former Prime Minister did not do his homework properly to put, you know, the opposition then, I mean, to put William Ruto on check so that he doesn't go to State House. I think his supporters are still reeling in that pain of, I mean, we thought that you could actually go all the way. So, but in terms of piling pressure on Ruto, it should not be over the poll promises, because the promises were not Azimio promises. The promises were not citizens' promises. These were Kenya Kwanza promises. And therefore, if you really want to put pressure, the issue would be on policies. You put pressure on, you know, delivering on the constitutional demands, the lawful, what the law requires. But if you're just trying to challenge somebody on his own promises, which he made, and yet it's not 100 days, I don't think people resonate with that quite correctly. What they resonate with is the Prime Minister's energy, but in terms of putting pressure, it should be on what the law says. Has that been done? I think that Raila Odinga did not agree with the promises anyway, and I don't think he is coming out to necessarily say, we want to see you do what you promised. It is about the law. It is about what the president should do today, not necessarily what he promised, because you are going to say, okay, you promised 50%. Now we want 50%. He has already elected his PSS only with 11 women. So I think that the Prime Minister will go forward to ensure that there is what is the law, there is what the people expect, and he should do, even if he did not promise it during his campaigns.
Right. Arnold, I mean, with all this pressure that is already piling on the new administration, the president said, look, give us some time and we will be handling some of the situation. Remember, some of the key issues he promised, stated that under his administration, counties would receive funds from the national government on time. That is yet to happen. Odinga is accusing the head of state of trying to implement policies without going through the right legal channels. So there's a lot of things that are happening here. But is it fair to put so much pressure on a new administration that says, look, we found a mess, let us fix this, and then now we start talking about the promises that we had pledged?
I think Taifa Leo really summarizes what we are trying to speak about the situation as it is. I struggled, I didn't get that word. If I had seen Taifa Leo before I did my first submission, that's exactly what a lot of those ministers are doing now. On to your question about the pressure we are giving the current administration. I think a lot of that pressure is actually misplaced, because like I said, we do not have even the structure in place. He is going in court to challenge even PSS, the PSS list, for example. He's already gone to court. So what if the court actually grants some of his prayers? It means that for the next 2-3 months, we will still be in court. We wouldn't be able to deliver Definitely
so
no.
it's unfair to blame the
a number of
president?
it. I think it's too early, and also it's not really. We have to look at it two ways. First of all, when you promise 100 days, this is not like the US where you can actually come up with your government in the next 2-3 weeks and you are done. We have got a framework, rigid. I find it quite rigid, and therefore, when politicians also promise that we will do this in 100 days, we are now going to mark the 60th day, I think. We are headed towards that end.
And
even government,
40 remaining.
and even government in itself is not in place. So even as we pressure them, where are you going to send money in counties where some governors went and chased away every chief officer, suspended all chief officers and the CCs that were there, even though they still would be working and they can still work for them the way William tried to work with the others for Uhuru's team. So if you are to send them money, if the control of budget were to send money to the counties, you do not have a chief officer for finance, for example. You do not have a county secretary. How is that money even going to serve people? They don't have a CIDP, they do not have an ADP. Those are the tools and instruments for appropriation. So how are you going to do that? It's not easy. Those promises are good, but then we have got a framework. We are a country of the rule of law, like he said, and there is so much that is actually systemic that will not allow people to run around. So even as we go around, you know, it's so funny, and I think he's brought out that mildly, that during campaigns, Raila would say, these particular things will not work. They are not the right things. Now he's actually telling these people who actually were making promises that he thought were wrong for the country to now do those wrong things for the country. I'm like quote unquote wrong. You didn't agree with it. Now you're telling them to actually go ahead and do with what they agreed. Of course, that is now a question that is beyond logic because, of course, they promised, so let them do it. But you disagreed with it, now you're telling them to actually do it. So it's quite funny. For me, I think that, and you should actually correct that, it's not the Prime Minister, it's actually the former Prime Minister, because we now have got a current Prime Minister who is Musalia Mudavadi. Technically, that's what he is.
Technically, that's a Prime Minister, but in
yes,
law,
former.
that is not a Prime Minister.
No,
it's a cabinet.
He's a Prime. Cabinet Secretary. And we did away with the word minister in the olden days. So the equivalent of the minister is now a CS. So we honestly have got a prime minister all but in name, if we were to be honest. In everything but in name. That's what he's doing, the functions and everything else. That said, on the pressure that we are putting on this particular administration, some of it is actually well placed. The other one, we are crossing the bridge before we get to it.
I mean, when we're talking about when the Azimio team says part of our plan, this is according to Wycliffe Oparanya, who's the coalition's executive committee chairperson, saying part of our plan is to have a shadow cabinet that will help our leader in our next course, as well as plan and pushing for reforms we want, which will target the Electoral Commission, the judiciary, and even the executive. I mean, isn't this a bit far-fetched?
You know, and that actually really brings this point home. You realize that a lot of our leaders actually take us for a joke. And they take politics, as in what has stopped Azimio up to now from coming up with a shadow cabinet? Do they also need to take it to parliament? Do they also need public participation to come up with a shadow cabinet? They have not done that. So it's literally on both sides, no one takes us seriously. Because one of those things Azimio would have done by now is actually to have a cabinet, a shadow cabinet, and they should be asking and actually providing alternatives and speaking in a structured manner. They are not. So literally, I've just realized, after you read that, I realized that both the government and the deemed opposition are not any different. Hali ya mkeka ndio hali ya gunia. As in, these guys, all of them are the same. At least on the other side, government will say that we have got a framework, a legal and constitutional framework that is actually rigid. We can't go around. You can't vet PSS when you want. We still have a lot of steps to actually go through. But for the opposition, why don't they have these things in place? So they're already talking about 2027. They've not even given us a shadow cabinet. They've not told us how they're going to move forward, but they're telling us about 2027 and how they're going to win. Literally taking us back to campaigns.
Right.
So none of them is actually like really helping us.